Chapter 6. The storm had only grown worse as I sped down the lonely narrow path leading away from the Dralok estate. The rain came down in relentless sheets, each drop a sharp tap against the windshield, as if the sky itself was clawing to get in. The windshield wipers worked furiously, but even their frantic motion could barely keep up with the deluge, leaving my view of the road ahead a distorted blur. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me, the dark silhouettes of ancient oaks on either side of the path looming like specters, their twisted branches reaching out as if to ensnare me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, the leather slick beneath my fingertips. I could feel the chill of the storm even inside the car, the cold seeping through the windows and into my bones. But it wasn't just the weather that gave me goosebumps. My mind was a whirlwind, spinning with the images of those portraits, those lifeless, painted eyes that had seemed to follow me, the unsettling realization that the Draloks were definitely hiding someone in that house. The memory of that voice, that desperate plea from behind that stone door, echoed in my thoughts. I could still hear it, faint but persistent, as if the wind outside carried its whisper. I was so lost in these thoughts, the growing certainty that something was horribly wrong in that house, that I almost didn't even notice the dark figure that began to emerge from the fog ahead. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly in the mud, tires spinning on the slick, uneven path before coming to a halt. My heart leapt into my throat as I leaned forward, squinting through the rain-splattered windshield. For a moment, I thought it was just another trick of the storm, my eyes playing cruel tricks on after all that I had just seen. But then I saw it clearly. A boy, standing motionless in the middle of the road. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, the strands clinging to his sickly pale, almost ghostly skin. His clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of a photograph from another century. He wore a tailored jacket, the kind with high lapels, and trousers that ended just above his mud-caked boots. The fabric, though dark and soaked, seemed heavy, as if weighed down by the ages. His cheeks were sunken, his face gaunt, but it was his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. Those same dark, hollow eyes staring directly at me, unblinking, as if they could see straight through my soul. A wave of terror washed over me as I realized who I was looking at. This was Cedric, the boy from the portrait. The same boy with the same lifeless gaze, standing there in the flesh, middle of a storm-ravaged road. Without thinking, I threw open the car door, the wind nearly ripping it out of my grasp as I stepped out into the downpour. The rain was cold and harsh against my skin, drenching me in seconds, but I hardly noticed. My focus was solely on this boy. "What are you doing out here?" I yelled, my voice barely carrying over the roar of the storm. I took a few steps closer, the mud sucking at my shoes. "Why are you out in the middle of the road?" The boy didn't move. He stood perfectly still, his thin frame unbowed by the wind that whipped around us, the rain that pelted down in relentless waves. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost in the tempest, yet it reached me with a chilling clarity. "You must leave this town," he said, his tone devoid of emotion, just like his gaze. "And never look back." I hesitated, a cold dread settling in my gut. "Why?" I shouted back. "What are you saying?" But the boy didn't answer directly. His eyes, dark and unreadable, seemed to drill into mine, as if he was searching for something within me, weighing my very soul. His words came slowly, as if each one was being carefully chosen, weighed before it's spoken.
Whatever you seek here,
he began, his voice barely audible over the relentless downpour.
It's not worth glory. It's not worth fame. Those petty things, they fade quickly in the light of what you'll find.
I was utterly in disbelief in hearing this. The sheer poetic tone of this child was incredible, almost like I was exchanging words with a wise elderly man. "What do you mean?" I blurted out.
One may wander so deep into dark water, but by the time it has risen above his chin, he turns only to see the shore has vanished behind him.
I felt my breath catch in my throat. How could a child speak with such depth, such eerie certainty? It was as though he wasn't a boy at all, but something much older wearing the mask of a youthful child. The storm continued to thrash around us, the rain pounding against my car like a relentless drum. But all I could focus on was this, who seemed less like flesh and blood, and more like a specter pulled from the depths of another world. There was something unearthly about him, yet I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Here I stood before a seemingly young boy, his voice perfectly measured, his speech articulated with a precision that belied his age. Standing like a statue in the middle of this storm. Meanwhile, I was squinting through the downpour, clutching onto the car door for my balance as the wind whipped around me, the rain stinging my face and blurring my vision. But the boy, he didn't even blink, not once. It was as if the storm didn't affect him in any way, as though he existed in a separate reality, one where the harsh elements had no impact. My thoughts swelled in a chaotic mix of fear and confusion. He knows. The realization hit me like a lightning strike. This boy knew exactly what his family was hiding. The question burned on my tongue, a desperate need for answers breaking through the shock. "What are you hiding back there?" The words tumbled out, more a plea than a demand, but the boy's expression didn't change. His dark, emotionless eyes locked onto, unreadable and unnerving.
Leave this town and never look back. That is all you need to know.
He repeated, his voice calm, unwavering, as if reciting a truth he had known for a long time. Something inevitable. "Why are you telling me this? Why are you helping me?" My voice cracked, a mix of hope and fear woven into the question. The boy turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward the dark forest that bordered the road. For a moment, he lingered there, his small frame nearly lost in the storm. Then, he looked back at me, his face still void of emotion.
There is a purity in you,
he said quietly, his words carrying a weight far beyond his years.
I would sooner see it spared. There are fates a man mistakes for purpose, only to learn too late. They were waiting to devour him whole.
And with that, he began to slowly turn away, the storm seeming to part just enough to allow him passage. His figure, slender and ghostly, started to dissolve into the mist, as if the storm itself was swallowing him. I watched, frozen in place, as he disappeared into the swirling haze. Then, Almost instinctively, my eyes were drawn upward. Above where he had stood, a small handful of crows circled ominously, their dark forms slicing through the misty sky. They moved in an eerie synchronized pattern, as though they were too in league with the boy. Part of the strange, detached world he inhabited, their screeching swallowed by the roar of the storm, their black feathers barely visible against the darkening clouds. And then, just like the boy, they began to fade, their shapes dissolving into the gray, as if they had never been there at all. "Wait," I called out, the word ripping from my throat in a desperate plea. I lurched forward, trying to follow him, to catch up, but he was gone, along with his footprints, just vanished. The rain battered against my face as I scanned the road, searching for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No figure, no crows, just a relentless storm in the empty road ahead. My heart was pounding almost out of control, at a frantic drumbeat of fear and disbelief. I stumbled back to my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the door. I slid inside, the interior offering a small refuge from the storm's fury. But it did nothing to quell the turmoil in my mind. I turned the key and I slowly eased the car back onto the path, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the boy standing there once more. But the road behind me was as empty as the one ahead. I drove through the storm, my thoughts a chaotic whirl of fear and questions. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the torrential rain, and the headlights barely cut through the thick mist. The narrow dirt path seemed to stretch on forever, the towering trees on either side swaying violently in the wind. Each crack of thunder felt like it was splitting the earth in two, and every shadow, every flicker of movement outside the car made my heart jump into my throat. I couldn't shake the image of that boy, his words, his eerily still presence, and the way he had simply vanished. By the time I finally reached Darwin's house, I was a mess of frayed nerves and raw fear. The storm hadn't let up in the slightest, and the wind howled as I pulled up into his drive, the tires skidding slightly on the wet gravel. I parked the car, my hands still shaking as I killed the engine. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and braced against the wind as I quickly made my way to the front door. The rain lashed against me, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones as I pushed open it and stepped inside. It was dimly lit, with only a few lamps casting a warm yellowish glow over the room. The air was thick with the scent of books and wood polish, a comforting smell that did little to soothe the terror still clawing at my insides. The wind rattled the windows, and the house creaked and groaned, as though it too was feeling the weight of the storm. I turned a corner to see Darwin asleep on the sofa, a stack of documents scattered across his chest, his reading glasses perched on the edge of the coffee table. He looked peaceful, completely oblivious to the turmoil raging both outside and within me, but I needed to tell him. I needed to get this out, to make sense of what had just happened. I walked over and shook his shoulder gently, my hand trembling as I did. Darwin, wake up," I whispered urgently, my voice shaking. He stirred, blinking groggily as he sat up, the papers sliding off his chest and onto the floor. "Ethan? What's going on?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep, but concern creeping into his tone as he saw the expression on my face. I didn't even take a moment to catch my breath. The words poured out of me, rushed and urgent. I went to the Dralok house. They're keeping a child down there, beneath the house. I heard her, Darwin. They didn't want me to find her, but I did. She needs help." My heart raced as I spoke, the reality of what I had encountered settling over me like a suffocating weight. Dylan sat up so quickly I thought he might fall off the couch. His eyes were wide, every trace of sleep gone, replaced by a mix of disbelief and urgency. You what? He said, almost in a whisper, but his voice carried the weight of trying to comprehend the unthinkable. I swallowed, the gravity of what I just revealed settling in my chest like a lead weight. There's a room beneath their house. I heard a girl begging for help behind a stone door at the end of this basement. Darwin ran a hand through his hair, pushing the scattered documents off his lap and onto the floor without a second thought. If you are absolutely sure about what you heard, we need to do something, now. We can't just sit here. I nodded, the urgency of the situation pulling us both out of our stunned silence. Let's go. We need to get to the police station. Tell them everything. Without another word exchanged, we scrambled out the door, the storm welcoming us back with its unyielding fury. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain lashed at us as we hurried to the car. I could barely keep my hand steady as I turned the key in the ignition. We sped off, the narrow road feeling even more treacherous under the onslaught of the storm. The drive was a blur of dark, rain-soaked roads and thoughts that raced faster than the wind outside. By the time we reached the police station, the storm had only grown worse, as if the entire world was conspiring to drown us in its chaos. The station was a squat brick building, its lights dimmed by the downpour. We pulled up to the entrance and bolted from the tunnel, our shoes splashing through the puddles as we made our way inside. The reception area was small and poorly lit, the fluorescents buzzing faintly above us. A few officers milled out, glancing up at us with marveled curiosity as we entered. The atmosphere was heavy, the storm's presence even felt within the building's walls. I strode up to the desk, water dripping from my coat onto the uneven floor. We approached the reception desk, where an elderly man sat hunched over a stack of paperwork. His hair was thin and white, matching the deep lines that creased his face. He didn't even glance up at first, his pen scratching lazily across the paper, as if it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the present moment. When he finally looked up, I was struck by the weariness in his gaze, eyes that had seen too much and grown tired of it. He gave us a slow, measured once-over, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place us. I need to speak with the chief. It's urgent, I said, my voice tinged with the urgency that seemed foreign to this place. For a moment, the old man just stared at me, as if weighing whether or not I was worth the effort to respond. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, he raised his pen and pointed it down the dimly lit hallway. Down the hall, on the right, he muttered, his voice as tight as his eyes. Darwin and I exchanged a quick glance, the gravity of what we were about to do settling in our minds. The hallway ahead of us was lined with aging photographs and plaques, a testament to a different time where perhaps this station had been a beacon of hope. Now, it felt more like a mausoleum, a place where memories came to die. The floor creaked underfoot as we made our way down the corridor, each step echoing in the otherwise oppressive silence. At the end of the hall was a door, its wooden surface worn and scratched, with a small brass plaque that read, Chief Morgan. I hesitated for a moment, hand hovering over the doorknob before knocking. The sound was sharp, intrusive, almost out of place in the deathly stillness of the station. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Behind the desk sat a man who looked as though he had been carved from the very wood of his chair, solid, stoic, with a presence that commanded respect. His skin was the color of aged mahogany, his hair a shock of white that contrasted sharply with the darkness of the room. He's dressed in a creased navy blue uniform, but it was his eyes that held my attention, piercing with a depth that seemed to hold the secrets of the world. He looked up from the papers on his desk, fixing me with a gaze that made it clear he wasn't one to suffer fools. He looked up from the paperwork in front of him, folding his hands together on the desk. "What can I do for you boys?" he asked, his voice steady, but I could hear the weight of exhaustion in it. I didn't waste any time. "Chief, I've been sent here to solo investigate the recent murders and disappearances around town," I began, feeling the urgency rise in my voice. "Earlier tonight, I was up at the Dralok estate, questioning the father, Mr. Dralok. While I was there, I heard a voice beneath their house. They're keeping a child down there. She needs our help." The chief's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of recognition, perhaps, or maybe disbelief. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting past me for a moment, as if he was recalling something long buried in his memory. Then he focused back on me. "A child, you say?" "Yes," I insisted, gripping the edge of his desk. "I heard her. She was crying for help, locked behind a stone door in their basement. There's something wrong in that house. We have to act now." Morgan sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of too many years spent in this town. "You know, son," he began, his tone soft but firm, "you're not the first person to come to me with stories about that family. We've had our share of complaints over the time, strange things people think they've seen or heard. But whenever we investigate, nothing. No evidence, no trace of anything out of the ordinary." He looked at me directly, his eyes serious and almost pleading. "Without solid evidence, my hands are tied. I can't just go barging into someone's home based on hearsay." I felt a surge of frustration boiling inside me. "You're saying you won't do anything? There's a child down there, and you're just going to ignore it?" The chief met my eyes, his expression weary but steady. He sighed deeply, as if the weight of 1,000 burdens rested on his shoulders. "I understand your frustration. I really do," he replied, his voice calm but resolute. "Believe me, I want to do something, but my hands are tied. I can't send my men up there again without concrete evidence. I'm sorry, but it's just the way it works, son." I could feel my hands balling into fists at my side, my nails digging into my palms. "Evidence?" I shot back, my voice rising with indignation. "There is a little girl locked up down there, for God's sake. Isn't that enough?" He shook his head slowly, his gaze dropping to his desk, almost as if he couldn't bear to look me in the eye. "Not without proof," he said softly. "I need more than just your word, my boy. If I go in there without that, I'll have a lot to answer for legally, politically, all of it." His words felt like a slap in the face, a deep sinking feeling settling in my gut, mixing with the anger already boiling there. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look on his face stopped me, a look that said he was as trapped as I was, caught in a web of rules and regulations that wouldn't bend, not even in the face of something like this. For a moment, I felt the fight drain out of me. I clenched my jaw, my teeth grinding together. "Fine," I muttered, the word heavy with resignation. Darwin pushed the door open, and a blast of cold air rushed in from the... He stepped through, feeling the anger and frustration burning in my chest. The room behind us had settled into a suffocating quiet, broken only by the hum of a flickering overhead light and the low rumble of the storm outside. The atmosphere felt thick, like the fog had seeped in through the cracks of the old building, wrapping itself around every corner. The officers in the reception area were scattered around their desks like lifeless mannequins. One of them, a younger, thin guy with a buzz, glanced up at me, then quickly looked away, pretending to be engrossed in the paperwork in front of him. A man with a graying beard stared blankly at him, his hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug as if it were a lifeline. The old man at the front desk, his skin pale and waxy under the fluorescent lights, raised his eyes to meet mine for a brief second before dropping them back down. His fingers twitched slightly as he gripped his pen. Darwin paused at the exit, his hand on the waiting for me. But I couldn't leave it like this. I turned back to face the room, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest it felt like the whole building could hear it. "So this is it," I shouted, my voice echoing off the wood brick walls. "This is what passes for law and order in this town?" A few officers stiffened, shifting uncontrollably in their chairs. One of them, a woman with dark circles under her eyes, looked down at her desk, pretending to shuffle some papers. The old man at the desk just blinked slowly, his expression empty, like he was somewhere far away. I took a step forward, letting my voice carry. "Is this how you protect your own? By doing nothing? By turning a blind eye and letting people just disappear?" I could hear the rawness in my own voice, the frustration cutting through every word. A heavy silence followed. I scanned their faces, searching for a sign, any sign of resolve, of backbone. But all I saw was the same blankness, the same hollow look that I'd seen in their chief's eyes. The storm outside beat against the windows, rain slashing against the glass like it was trying to claw its way in. Darwin shifted at the door, clearly impatient, his eyes darting to the street beyond. But I couldn't let go. I could feel my anger, my disbelief boil over. "You're supposed to be the one to stand up when no one else will," I said, my voice rising. "You're supposed to protect people." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker in one officer's eyes, a quick glance that darted away as soon as it met mine. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same lifeless resignation. I felt my fists clench at my summits once more, the heat of frustration burning in my palms. Darwin gave me a look, a warning, a plea, but I ignored it. "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head, turning toward the door, ready to leave, to get out of this place that smelled like stale coffee and apathy. But as I reached for the handle, I couldn't stop myself. I spun back around, my voice cutting through the thick air like a blade. "So this is it then?" I shouted. "No one's going to stand up for what's right? No one's going to do a damn thing?" The room remained silent. A few officers stared at their hands. Others avoided my gaze altogether, pretending they hadn't heard. I took a step back, my breath heavy, my heart's racing. "Fucking cowards," I spat, loud enough for every single one of them to hear. The words came out like a slap, harsh and unforgiving, and for a moment, they hung there in the air. I turned and shoved open the door, stepping out into the rain. The cold, wet wind hit my face like a slap, the storm swallowing my words as I left them all behind, feeling a mix of anger and disgust churn in my guts like a storm of its own. Back outside, the storm hit us harder than before. Sheets of rain slashed sideways through the air, the wind howling like a wounded animal. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the cold seeping through my bones. Darwin was right behind me, his shoulders hunched against the rain. We stopped under a small overhang by the front of the station, just enough shelter to keep us from being completely soaked. I turned to him, still feeling the frustration boiling in my veins. "What are we going to do now?" I asked, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. My heart was still racing, adrenaline still pumping, the confrontation inside. I wanted to act, to do something, anything, but Darwin's expression told me he was deep in thought, weighing options. He glanced at me, his eyes narrowed against the rain. "Maybe we should wait until the storm's passed. See if we can find someone else willing to help. Someone with a bit of clout around here." I shook my head immediately. "And waste more time? We don't have until morning. Who knows what could happen to her by then?" I could feel the urgency in my voice, almost like I was pleading with him. We can't afford to sit around hoping for backup, Darwin. He let out a heavy sigh, wiping the rain from his face. All right, then what? March up there with no plan? No idea of what we're walking into? We don't even know if the girl is real, Ethan. For all we know, this could be a trap, something to lure us into. She's real. I cut him off, my tone leaving no room for doubt. I heard her, Darwin. I heard her. My mind started to race with the stress of the situation. Why don't we just go up there now and get her out? Darwin looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You want to go back up there, right now, in the middle of this weather? Ethan, we can't just go up there and do that. Why not? I show back. Because it's reckless, he said, his voice steady but firm. Look, we don't know what's inside that house, or what that family's capable of. They have money, power, half the town's in their pocket. We walk in there guns blazing, and they could easily turn this around on us. We'd be trespassing, committing a crime ourselves, and we'd be giving them all the ammunition they need to bury this thing for good. I opened my mouth to argue, but he raised a hand to stop me. Listen, I want to help her too, Ethan, but rushing in without a plan is only going to backfire on us both. We need to be smart about this. I swallowed, my anger still hot, but my resolve cooling under his logic. He was right, of course. Charging him blindly wouldn't help anyone. But the thought of doing nothing, of just standing here in the rain while that girl, if she was real, might be suffering, was unbearable. So what then? I muttered, frustration edging back into my voice. We just stand here with our thumbs up our ass, hoping for a miracle? Darwin sighed again, shaking his head. We need a plan. We need more information. And then we heard it, a voice, low and rough, coming from behind us. I'll come with you. We both froze, turning back toward the station. At first, we couldn't see anything. The voice seemed to drift out with the shadows, almost swallowed by the roar of the storm. I squinted through the rain, trying to make out the figure huddled beneath the awning that ran along the front of the station. Darwin and I exchanged a glance before we started to move back toward the source of the voice, our footsteps splashing through puddles as we went. A man slouched on one of the wooden benches bolted to the wall, half hidden by the shadows. He had the look of someone who'd been there a while, hunched over, shoulders stooped, as if trying to make himself small against the cold. His hair was long and tangled, black as pitch, hanging wet against his face. A thick, scruffy beard covered his jaw, flecked with silver, and his uniform, what was left of it anyway, was crumpled and worn, the patches frayed at the edges. His boots were caked with mud, and his eyes, dark and heavy, bore the look of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. As we drew closer, he glanced up, meeting our eyes. His face was etched with exhaustion, but his gaze was steady. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked up at us, calm and certain, like he'd been waiting for us long. I've never trusted that family, he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, with an edge that made my skin prickle. Not since I started working here. Something about them. It ain't right. I took a step closer, my heart pounding, the rain still hammering around us. And who are you? The man straightened a little, his expression unchanged. Officer Peterson. But you can call me Jack, he replied, then snorted, like the name tasted bitter in his mouth. Or at least, I was. Suspended a few months back. They told me I was too reckless, too quick to pull my gun. But I know the truth. They didn't want me poking my nose where it didn't belong. I glanced at Darwin, who was watching Jack with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Why'd they suspend you? I asked, trying to gauge. if this man was some crackpot, or if there was something more behind his words. Jack gave a humorless chuckle, looking down at the muddy ground. At that moment, his demeanor shifted in an instant, his careless tough guy facade slipping away. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that felt deeply human, a raw mix of sadness and regret, a wound still fresh. 3 months back, my boy vanished. He started, his voice rough. Jacob, 4 years old. We were out in the woods, not far from the trails. He loved watching butterflies. Used to chase the downed things like his life depended on it. Jack trailed off, staring through me like he was back there, in that clearing among the trees. I stayed quiet, feeling the weight of whatever was coming. And then he continued. The temperature dropped fast. Not normal cold, neither. This was different. Like the air just died. Like all the warmth was sucked out of the world. He swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting like he was still searching for his son. Then came this fog. His voice cracked, and I could see his jaw tighten as he fought to keep his composure. It didn't naturally roll in from the trees, not like weather. It came up from the ground, thin at first, just curling round our boots, then thicker, darker. Within minutes I couldn't even see the damn trees around me. His breathing grew heavier, the memory gripping his words with fear. That's when I heard it. He turned to look at me, breathing. He paused, glancing back at me, his voice thick with emotion, but not like the breathing of anything I've ever heard. It was wet, ragged, like something on the verge of death, like something with rotten lungs trying to drag air through a dead throat. His voice hardened. Whatever it was, it started moving around us in the fog. It wasn't just the sound of footsteps. The sounds it made were disgusting, wet, cracking and popping, like joints pulling the wrong way, like bones snapping and shifting with every movement. He shook his head, almost to himself. It circled us. I swear to God, it was circling us like we were some fucking prey. 1 second I could hear it ahead of me, then behind, then off to my left, then my right. It was all around me, like it was toying with me. I could never see what it was. His expression of grief shifted into fury. And then I looked down, and my boy was gone. The words landed like a stone. No scream, no cry, no footsteps running off. He was right next to me, and then he wasn't. He rubbed a hand over his mouth, then continued. I shouted his name till my throat bled, searched those woods for hours that day and days after that. There was never a single trace of him. His eyes darkened, but I knew. He leaned forward. I knew it was them, that fucking family up on the hill. I don't know how I knew, I just did. Call it instinct, call it madness. I went straight to that crumbling house, kicked open that door, found that old man, and put my gun in his face. He let out a bitter laugh, humorous and cold. Chief found out soon enough, of course, suspended me before sundown. That's why I'm here. That's why I don't give two shits what anyone says. It ain't over, not for me, not until I find out what happened to my boy. Jack's story hung in the air like a thick boom, heavier than the rain still pelting us. I felt the weight of his words, the desperation in his voice when he talked about his boy going missing. This guy was tough, all bravado and grit, but in that moment he seemed stripped bare, Just a dad who'd lost his kid in the worst way possible. I glanced over at Darwin. He looked as thrown off as I felt, his eyes darting to the ground. I'm sorry, Jack, I managed, my voice quieter than I intended. Can't imagine. Darwin added, Yeah, man, I'm really sorry. I had no idea. His words were simple, but I could hear the sympathy in them. Jack turned away, his eyes fixed on a spot somewhere out in the storm, maybe far beyond it, like he was still out there in those woods, searching. Yeah, he mumbled. Thanks. He cleared his throat, like he was trying to swallow down the emotion. He stood there for a long moment, the rain drumming against the roof above, the wind howling around the corners of the building. It was like the storm had quieted everything else, made the world shrink down to just the three of us. I didn't know what to say. What could you say to a man who'd gone through that? Jack finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough. Look, let's just find some way to go that's out of this. He gestured to the sheets of rain coming down. I nodded, glad for the suggestion. Darwin's place is close, I said, turning to him. We could head there, figure out what the hell we're going to do. Darwin agreed quickly. Yeah, let's get out of here, he said, pulling his jacket tighter around him. Jack nodded once, curtly, and we all made a dash for the car. The wind whipped against us, the rain coming in sideways, soaking us in seconds. I wrestled with the car keys, hands shaking from the adrenaline, finally managing to get the door open. We piled in, slamming the door shut against the storm. The drive back to Darwin's was tense and quiet. The rain hammered down like it was trying to break through the roof, and the wipers struggled to keep up. None of us spoke. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on all of us. When we finally got there, I parked as close to the door as I could, and we all sprinted through the downpour, heads down against the wind. We burst through the door, dripping water onto the floor, slamming it shut behind us. Darwin's place was a mess, papers and books scattered everywhere, empty coffee cups stacked on every surface. Water pooled at our feet, but no one cared to take off their soaked jackets. Jack, Darwin, and I moved silently into the living room, the dull thud of our footsteps swallowed by the roaring storm. The thunder rumbled in the distance, and the rain beat relentlessly against the windows. Darwin cleared off the table with quick, sweeping movements, knocking papers, mugs, and whatever else had gathered there to the floor. He muttered something under his breath, but didn't make eye contact. I could feel the tension hanging in the air between us. We all knew we were up against something far more complicated than we could fully comprehend. The living room was dim, the only light coming from a small flickering lamp on a side table. Shadows danced around across the walls, and the oppressive atmosphere made the room feel smaller than it was. Jack stood by the window, watching the rain. His rugged frame and dark beard made him look like a man comes from the very mountains this town was nestled in. He wasn't massive, but there was a solidness about him, a quiet strength. He didn't speak much, but the determined set of his jaw said enough. He was focused, just like the rest of us, ready to get to the bottom of what was going on in this town. We gathered around the table, the room heavy with tension. The air was thick with unspoken worries. How dangerous this was, how many things could go wrong, but we all knew we couldn't afford to dwell on those thoughts now. Darwin sat down first, rubbing his temples as if trying to push back the weight of everything that had happened. We need to be smart about this, he started, his voice low. We can't just walk in their home and demand answers. We don't have any proof. If we mess this up, we could make things a lot worse. I nodded, pulling out a chair. Right. The Draloks are well connected in this town. If we push too hard without a plan, they could turn this whole thing against us. Jack finally turned from the window, his eyes sharp, though his expression stayed controlled. They already have the town wrapped around their fingers, he said. We've all seen it. Complaints get buried, evidence disappears. No one's ever been able to pin anything on them. He didn't sound bitter, but the frustration was clear. Jack had been here longer than either of us. He knew the ins and outs of this town, and he had been after the truth for years, especially since his son disappeared. The Draloks were the obvious suspects. Everyone knew it, but no one could prove it. We don't have time to wait for the perfect moment, Darwin said, tapping the table lightly. If there's a girl in that house, we can't afford to hesitate. I leaned forward, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on me. He was right. I had heard the voice. The girl was real, and whatever was happening to her down there, we couldn't leave her to it. So how do we do this? I asked. We can't break in. We don't have any legal ground to stand on, and they'll turn it back on us the moment we try. Jack sat down, running a hand through his wet hair. We need something solid, a reason to get inside. If we go in without anything, they'll crush us. The room fell silence for a moment, only the storm filling the gaps between our thoughts. He was right. The Draloks were too careful, too smart. Even if everyone suspected them, they always managed to stay out of reach. We were dealing with a family that held all the cards, and we were running out of time. Darwin broke the silence. We could try getting the police involved again, but we already know how that ends. Morgan won't touch them. The best we've got is Jack. He shot a glance at Jack, who remained silent but didn't argue. Jack's suspension from the force was still fresh, and even if we had supports, it wasn't like he could go in with a badge and demand answers anymore. The police had been tiptoeing around that family for years, too afraid or too unsure to make a real stand. And now it was up to us. I leaned back in my chair, racking my brain for something, anything, that could tip the scales in our favor. The rain continued to beat against the windows. The thought of that girl's voice in the cellar echoed in my head. We couldn't leave her there, not after what I'd heard. Then it hit me like a train. There is someone who might be able to help us, I said slowly, as the idea formed in my mind. Someone who knows more about the Draloks than anyone else in this town. Darwin raised an eyebrow. Who? Lila, I said. She works at the library, I think. When I first got here, she told me about the Draloks. She was the one who warned me. She's been watching them for years, studying them. If anyone knows what we're up against, it's her. Jack sat forward, his eyes narrowing in thought. And you think she'll talk? She already has, I replied. She told me to be careful, that there's something about the Draloks that no one talks about. She's scared of them, but she might be willing to help, especially if she knows there's a child in. Darwin looked uncertain. You're sure we can trust her? I trust her, I said firmly. She's not part of whatever's going on in this town. She's an outsider, like us, and she's scared for a reason. I think she knows more than she's let on. Jack and Darwin exchanged glances, weighing the idea. We were running out of options, and we all knew it. Finally, Jack nodded. If she knows something, we need to hear it. I stood up, pulling my jacket back on, still damp from the storm. I'll go find her. The library's the only place I know she might be. Darwin gave a sharp nod. Be careful. The storm's only getting worse. Jack's voice was steady as I headed for the front door. Don't take too long. We need to move soon. I won't, I promised, opening the door to the fury of the storm. As the rain lashed against my face, I felt the weight of what I had to do settle in. There was no turning back now.